Hi, this is Phil Cooke, and welcome to today's episode of the Phil Cooke Podcast. Today, we're going to interview Korey Pollard. Now, Korey has been first assistant director, second assistant, unit production manager, producer, second unit director. He is Mr. Behind the Scenes when it comes to making network-level television episodic TV or films. And we're going to look at a behind-the-scenes, realistic, authentic tour of what it's like working in the trenches in the media and entertainment industry. You're going to learn some really interesting things about the toll it takes on your life, the schedule you have to live under, what you need to know, how you need to deal with network people, television people, film people. It's going to be a really interesting look behind the scenes, especially for someone who's trying to move into the industry. Stay tuned. It's going to be worth your while. Korey, I'm thrilled to have you on the podcast. This is really great. We've known each other for years, but this is the first time I've gotten you on here. And I want to really put you into the fire here and have a behind the scenes look of what it's really like working in the entertainment industry today.
Well, yeah, it's very different than what you think when you start out. It's an interesting thing how you spend so much time trying to get into this business.
Well, you actually started as an actor, right?
Well, honestly, I started as an extra at 12 years old. It was the first time I was on a film set. And in Eugene, Oregon, small town, Pacific Northwest, Mom allowed me to go and be an extra unescorted. Like, that can't happen today. That was 1980. Yeah. You just can't do that. No. But it opened my eyes to something that I just knew that I belonged. I felt more comfortable there than anywhere else. So as an extra, I learned a lot. I saw a lot of guys doing a lot of different jobs and thought, this is just the most amazing thing ever. And the fun thing about that particular job was they had all this amazing equipment, and then there was a go-kart. Now, we built go-karts in my neighborhood, and they had a camera mounted low to the ground to catch these runners' feet, but it was literally a go-kart. And I looked at these men and thought, these are just big boys with bigger toys. Like, that is a go-kart, but that's professional. So I hammered these camera people and the grip. Can I drive it? Can I drive it? Can I drive it? Can I drive it? 20 plus years later, I'm working with that same camera operator in the middle of a field in Kansas. And we realized, he said, he goes, where are you from? I said, I'm from Eugene, Oregon. He says, I worked in Eugene. And I said, oh, did you work on Personal Best? And he's looking at me. I can see his mind doing the math. Like, there's no way this kid was there. There's no way this guy, he's so young. He's 20-something years old. I was already in the guild at this point. And I said, yeah, I was the kid on the sidelines that wanted to ride. He goes, you're the kid with the go-kart. Oh, my gosh. So what happens in this business is once you get in, so I started as an extra. And then at 16, Rob Reiner came to Eugene, Oregon, and shot a film called Stand By Me. And I ended up with a very small, but enough of a role in it to where I still get residuals and all the fun stuff that goes with being in the Screen Actors Guild. And I fell in love with the process, wanted to be an actor. People thought I could be an actor, but I fell in love with the crew. I fell in love with that synergy that happens on a set. I fell in love with all these different people doing all these different things and trying to understand, how does all this stuff get there? Turns out that's what the first AD does. No idea at that point in my career as an actor standing on a set that I would ever be capable or even interested in becoming an assistant director. But the first time that came onto my radar was a particular day where they had stacked all the trailers to get us ready right outside the gates of a junkyard. The scene where we're getting the tattoos. All the boys get the tattoos. I'm one of the greasers in Kiefer's gang there. But they literally set it up to where my honey wagon door literally I had the makeup trailer next to that, got in the makeup trailer, walked through the gate, and we were shooting that scene. And then somebody came to me in the middle of the day, just before lunch, and said, hey, do you need anything out of your trailer, out of your honey wagon room? I said, I don't even need the room. I'm going to be here watching this all day. And I said, why? And they said, at lunch, all of that is moving so we can set up that to be the parking lot for X and X scene. And I said, what? What do you mean? What company move? What does that mean? He goes, stand next to Irby Smith, who was the first AD. Watch what happens. And he said, check in the gate. If the gate's good, ladies and gentlemen, that's company move, and then lunch. And when he said gate is good, trucks started, things started moving out, period cars, extras started walking into that lot all at the same time. I thought, that is unbelievable. So you
wanted to be that guy.
I didn't know for sure at that point. I just thought, I couldn't believe anyone could think of all that because it was a rolling city. There were so many trucks and trailers and all the things. And so I began this kind of longing for something more than just how to audition and be. At that point in time, I would have been, dude, where's my car? Because that was the kid that I was. There was no classic, I was a greaser in that movie, but by the time that movie was over, I was growing my hair long and being really stupid with all kinds of substances and things.
Yeah.
So I get to the point where in California, I decide I'm moving. I come down, and then I end up getting a job back in Eugene, Oregon as a prop guy. I also then began working as a swinging set dresser. So I was not anywhere near assistant directing. I was not anywhere near managing anything. I was just handed these jobs of moving furniture on the set or handling the props, which is anything the actors touch.
Right.
And fell in love with it. And people kept saying, "You're good at this, kid. You don't have to go to film school. You can do this. You'll be great." And I thought that meant I'd work with these people after I left Oregon. And that never happened. But those same people on those first 2 films in Eugene, Oregon, which is bizarre that I would leave to California and end up with 2 jobs back in my hometown. That's just unbelievable.
Well,
but at that time,
let's pause for a second and do some definitions for people that aren't real familiar. First of all, a first AD, a first assistant director, is not the director's assistant. Explain a little bit about what an AD does.
The first assistant director, the way I like to describe it is we are responsible for everything and control of nothing. We are the people that take the piece of paper once the director has been hired, the producers have raised the money, the actors are in position, the production designer who's going to make the sets look like the sets. All these people are hired, and they hand over the script to an assistant director who then breaks down every single element that is in the descriptions. And what's not in the descriptions, you have to begin a process of asking questions to understand how many extras are in that restaurant scene, how many cars are going to be on the street when we're walking down the street. Because none of that stuff is rarely. New York City, you might do a little, you just kind of go into the crowd and you control what you can, and the streets are the streets. But more often than not, when we're shooting in a street, a public place, I have populated every moving element, person, car, skateboard, hacky sacker, frisbee player, like everything you see is the job of the assistant director to go work with the director to get a sense of what the tone of each and every scene over the course of the entire script will be, which then becomes the schedule that I'm responsible for. So I put all of those elements, including the number of costume changes, because that is a day breakdown thing that happens in the long details about how to break all that down. So we're literally responsible for making sure that it's clear what the director's going for. And what's interesting is you're kind of the guy that is literally stuck in the middle. I clawed my way right to middle management. The reality is that the director's got a vision, the DP will also have a vision. The producers have an idea what they think if you have the writer around the set, and then you add the actors to it. And the role of the assistant director is to be a peacemaker often, and bringing a commonality to the vision, a focus to the vision. And some days you're following someone else's vision, because there are situations where hierarchies win and lose all throughout the day and throughout a project, and being discerning of who that is at the given moment. So we literally take every element, break it down, put it into a strip board schedule, put it into the call sheet, put it into then actualizing what that stuff is, what we've actually spent man hours. It used to be rolls of film. Now it's all digital stuff. But we still keep track of every single sound.
I actually think it's the hardest job on the set. I mean, and then on top of that, you're driving the train. You're the guy that's pushing, saying, "Guys, we got to finish this up. We got another scene we got to do." You're pushing all day long. And
the problem solving that goes with every problem, because no matter what you reach, you always reach for planet ideal, but what we all discover is that there's not enough oxygen in the atmosphere of planet ideal to sustain life for very long. So it's a matter of what are we going to do now that something is wrong, something didn't show up, something's not available. How do we continue moving this thing on? So it's literally a cross between a clown and a juggler. You are awesome. A camp counselor, you're a psychiatrist and a therapist. You are, it is a job that has a description that never seems to end, because we end up being responsible for everything that no one else wants to handle. And you have to make sure you make someone responsible to handle it so that it can be delivered on the day.
All right, let's keep with the definitions. Now, what about a second a second AD? The second AD is the crowd.
Is the person that once the first AD is hired and has gone through and broken down the script into the board, into the, we use a program called Movie Magic Scheduling. And you begin to kind of create a list of things that second assistant director will go through in prep and begin to have meetings on. Let's have a meeting with the extras coordinator to see how many extras. Let's pull pictures because we're going to have very specific extras around the table. Let's say in the restaurant,
Right.
we want a very specific, or we're in line at a market and there's some very, interesting specific looks that the director's looking for. And so you'll pull the pictures and you'll get these people fit. Now in COVID, you have to do COVID testing and like all this stuff that is just unbelievable, the amount of effort it takes to do that. They will then become responsible for being sure that, like I mentioned before, a lot of the cars that you see on the street will come with the extras or a precision driver, or there's very specific picture cars that need to be gotten. That list will be compiled by the first assistant director and the director, communicated to the transportation coordinator, the picture car guy, and then the second AD is the one who follows through on making sure that all that stuff is coming to and being available to us on the days that we're doing it. And that person also is responsible for making the call sheet, which is the daily schedule. So it goes from my big breakdown of the number of cars, people, food on the tables, plates, silverware, like literally everything. And they put it onto the call sheet, and then they go around to the departments and confirm that stuff is going to be available at the right time and all the way through. And they basically then are responsible for, once the schedule's done, they make sure the actors are fit, that they have their haircuts, that they get into the hair and makeup chair on time, that they're dressed and standing on the set on time, that they've got their COVID test, that they're going to be, ready for us at any given moment. And there's so many rocks that get thrown into the pond. Let's imagine the strip board is, a bunch of strips in a row. Bam, you throw a rock in the middle of a strip board and the ripples just affect everything. And they are often the second AD, the one that once I discern that there's an issue or a problem with something, they then follow through as I'm driving that train forward, as you aptly described. They're the ones running around feeding the track. Literally, it's often as if you're running in front of a train, laying the track as you go. There have been times where I feel like I'm on the track. On the train rather, with the track being built, but it's a trip.
All right. Now, you've also been a unit production manager, or UPM. Explain a little bit about what that is.
It goes a step further into the details. So the first AD and the UPM work hand in hand. The UPM generally has an idea of what a budget will look like. You don't really know until you've got an actual schedule and a board. So there's a kind of a lump sum that's attributed to what you think you're going to do. In the best case scenarios, like as I've line produced and working as a line producer UPM, I like to start with the schedule with the board because all the elements are there. They'll be added. There's things that come up as you continue down the path that you put into that affect your budget. But the UPM is responsible for making sure between the line producer and the UPM, they watch every line producer watches every line in the budget. There are categories in every single budget that are lines that are numbered categories per department, per situation. And the UPM line producer are the ones who watch that, make sure that we're staying on track with the amount of hours we're shooting in a day, the amount of cars that I'm that I can have. And if I go over on one day, I suddenly am losing elements on another day, and you have to start to adjust this whole thing. So they're the ones that do the accounting and organizing and hiring of the rest of the crew once the AD is in place and begins to put together the schedule and determine how many people on each day it's going to take.
So what last definition, second unit director. What you've done a lot of that.
Best job in the
Tell me
planet.
about that job.
Well, I haven't actually been the second unit assistant director. I've been the AD on many second units. And what that is it's the best unit ever usually. On action movies, you're out there doing the best action and the stuff that is... You will often have the first unit set up the actors leading into a stunt. And then you go and you shoot the stunts and you shoot the action sequences with all the details of a motorcycle chase, all the details of, crashing a car and flipping it, other than what the actors are covering. So you're seeing all the big action, the explosions, anything that falls and that kind of thing is usually generally done on a second unit. A lot of films will do first unit, second unit combinations where you are shooting the first unit, the cast is involved, but the second unit is doing the details of the coverage of whatever's exploding, whatever's being shot at, and things like that. And so it's just a unit within the film that generally goes off and does specific action, or you might have a second unit because an actor is only available on a certain day. So the director and first AD from first unit will be shooting something with regular actors. Then you've got two other actors that weren't available, so they'll shoot something simultaneously. We do that often in television where we do it concurrently.
So you spent most of your career in episodic television, particularly big budget action type shows. Give us a few examples of some of the network TV shows that you've worked on.
Yeah, I've done most of my first AD work has been television. Prior to that, a lot of the second AD work was all big features. So some television I've been involved with, this puts you back a few years, but I was so pleased and grateful to be a part of the team that brought House MD to life. There was some stuff that had never been said on television at that point in time.
That's right.
And that guy was a really great way to deliver that message. I did the first season of Deadwood. I did 3 seasons of Monk. I've done a huge thing called the Jack Ryan for Amazon. I've done a thing called The Player with Wesley Snipes as he just got out of jail and was getting his first job back in television. I've done a lot of interesting stuff. I did the Orville for the first 2 seasons. I did 2 seasons of 911 for Ryan Murphy. I was a part of the assassination of Gianni Versace, which won many Emmys on the episodes that I was a part of. I'm so grateful to have been a part of that team with Dan Minahan.
And you've done the Navy SEAL series, I think, too.
Yeah,
right?
I've done a few of the SEAL team. That's a show that keeps trying to get me to come back, and it's a lot of fun, but it's so intense I can't imagine doing 10 episodes in a row.
Well, I know that show 9/11. I mean, 911. That was incredible action scenes in that stuff.
My gosh.
The setup of those must have been a nightmare.
For the right personality, it would be a nightmare. But for the right personality doing the job, it's just, I love solving problems. I love bringing teams together to organize and to get over what you think you can't get over. After working I worked on the movie Waterworld as a production assistant years ago, and the joke was that they were going to get all of my days to get into the guild on that. I did 188 days of principal photography and 2 weeks of second unit work out here at Catalina. Most of that was in Hawaii, and then we had about a month and a half here physically in the United States, on our terra firma here. So after you've done some things like that, or clear and present danger as a production assistant, you learn that there are really no big deals. It's just all in how you approach what is on the page and how well you communicate to people that what you have on the page isn't achievable, but here's something that is. Here's an option. Here's 2 options. Here's 3 options that could get you the point. And the longer you do action, the more you understand what kind of gags and gimmicks and explosives and things you will, want to ask your special effects team or your stunt guys if it's possible to do. And that's one of my favorite things to do. As much as I'm not a big proponent of violence in television and that stuff, the reality is I'm excellent at making it. And it's such a kind of conundrum to be that guy. And if you're going to go and spend the kind of time that it takes to do this, it's a lot more fun to be blowing things up and creating chaos than just, 2 faces in a room. And I love drama. The movie I just produced with Nathan Scoggins is a straightforward, unbelievably cool, dramatic, noir-ish mystery. And that's fun, and as a producer, I like that. But if I'm going to have to stand there all day on the set, I'd rather be blowing things up.
Well, so with a network series today, typically, how many days does it take to shoot one these days?
Well, it depends on where you are. For example, the Orville on the 3rd season ended up with 10-day episodes, but they only worked 4-day weeks. They still worked the same amount of hours. Most network television shows are between 8 and 9 days of shooting, and that's an 8 or 9 day prep schedule as well. So you're literally prepping for 9, shooting for 9, prepping for 8, shooting for 8. The last episode I did of SEAL Team, we did it in 7 days, and that was with, some health issues and people, not being available because of the health issues and in the middle of an action sequence. And you just figure out how to solve the problems and shoot with stunt doubles and go back and do coverage later and do overs with the stunt doubles. You get everything done you can because the machine just never stops. And
how big is the crew on a typical episodic series?
Between, on the physical set, 90 and 100. 150 if it's a big action day and you're out on location, because you tend to hire more teamsters and people to drive the trucks and things like that. But if you're on stage, it'd be between 70 and 90 folks.
And how long is a typical shooting day?
Well, that's what's amazing is it just depends on the show, the producers, the director, the ADs. I tend to be on projects that shoot between 10 and 12 hours, 10 and 11 hour days.
Okay.
a lot of first season shows, there's no way around longer hours in the beginning because you're trying to figure out who your team is, how they work well together. There are always problems that happen. But once you get a machine running, like Chicago Fire, I was on that for season 9, I guess it was, 2 years ago. And that is, and SEAL Team are two of the most well-oiled machines I've ever been on. With the huge action pieces that we were doing 10-hour days. SEAL Team was 10 hours almost every day, if not under, depending. If you're not doing action, you can generally get in under 8 to 10 hours.
It would seem that when you're working with that many people, driving the train, coordinating so many things, people skills would be about as important as the skill it takes to do your job. Am I wrong there?
No, you're not. And honestly, almost every position in the entertainment industry, life, I have a little saying, life is a people business, no matter where you are. It's the people, it's the humans. And so I work hard to manage the humans so that the project goes well, versus there are a lot of assistant directors and producers who think that the schedule is the only thing. And well, that's an approach. But the interesting thing is a lot of those people are so uptight and there's so much tension surrounding the dot and tittle of this particular schedule. Broad strokes, where I am before lunch and where I need to be after lunch. These are the things that I really look at, not every minute being exactly as I think it should be. Because the interesting thing is to go through all the prep process and think you've talked about things and think you understand something, and then to stand on the set with the director, the DP, and the producer and go, this is actually more important than we thought. We can't do this as quickly.
Yeah.
Okay, so now what we thought was going to take more later, can we look at that? Can it take less? But you have to be doing that while you're running toward the goal. You can't just stop and talk about it. Yeah. And so there's this constant give and take. And it's not rocket science, so it's not precise, but it is, once you've done a 2-hander, a 3-hander, a 5-person, or a 16-person shooting, gun battle, you get the sense of how long certain things like that take. And then you have to go, okay, well, are those people that I'm working with now similar as the people I was working with then? And it's just this constant thinking. And so it's always about getting to know the people and understanding, hey, this is what I think it's going to take. This is not, I'm not the god of the situation. I just have been around a few times. And what do you think of this? And so I work really hard with every individual that is leading the departments that I am interacting with to make sure they're aware of what my expectations are. If they're unrealistic, I need to hear it. And I lead that way. It's a very servant leadership management technique. It's not just, this is what we're doing.
Yeah, that's good. So, essentially, for people that don't really understand the film business too much, everybody on the set is essentially a freelancer.
Yeah.
So you're going from job to job to job, and you're constantly, talking to people, developing relationships, pitching your talent.
Yeah.
How long? Do you go a long time between episodic work? Give me an example of your, over a year. How often do you typically work?
When you're starting out, it's terrifying, because you don't know whether you're going to make it through any time. 33 years in, I don't know if I'm going to make it through the entire project. Assistant directors are the guys with the big target painted on their back. They're constantly going to blame you for stuff that's completely out of your control. I can't push how fast people light a set. I can't, but I can estimate and then try to, figure out how to pick up time in areas I can. So you start out really not sure if you're going to work, how long it'll be in between, and it's terrifying. Then about 3 to 5 years in, you start to realize you're actually kind of booking in advance. You know where you're going for a little while, but then there's these periods where you don't have a clue. And the interesting thing about television is it used to be seasonal. You would work essentially from around July to about April or May, and then you'd be off in the interim and have this hiatus. And I used to try to book jobs and figure things out and then I realized that the lifestyle, it's so exhausting to be in front of the freight train, I call it, dealing with all those elements all the time. So I learned with my wife to figure out how to sit down, look at our budget, figure out what it looks like to not work that 3-month period. So I work about 9 months a year, and I'm in a position now where I'm really trying to actually move up and only line produce in UPM. So I'm actually saying no to first AD stuff, which is a little nerve-wracking because You know, who's to say I'm actually going to get that next gig?
Because you're in demand for that.
Yeah. And so that's been a stressful time. So there have been periods when the business was slow and I would have 6 months off. I've had, a year off before. And it's a lifestyle choice, not a career. You don't get into this to go punch a clock. And there are guys that, in the union that feel like that's the thing. And they can eventually, once you're in a number of years, you can kind of book out like that, but there's no guarantee. It's such a fickle business. And now we're in a transition where, the 53-year-old guys like me are kind of the aging guys, and you've got this whole young crowd coming in.
Yeah.
And they have a different way of looking at it too. That's what's so interesting is, we used to just take it on the chin, suck it up, work the horrible hours, just lucky to be there. And there's a sense coming in that people value their lives a little more maybe than we did, and maybe the guys before me in that generation. And so, there's this sense of like, we're just going to do whatever it takes. Like, nah, I don't want to work those hours you get coming from these kids today. You're like, that's good for you. Let's see how that goes. And it helps us to actually begin to prioritize, because I've had to really move away from the workaholism and the surrendering to the project and begin to build my family life back after about 10 years in. You're like, wow. We sat down, my wife and I, at our 10th wedding anniversary, and over dinner calculated the exact number of months I had been physically absent from our house, whether it was the state or the country, out of. And when we finished our dinner, we realized that it had been 27 months. If you put all those projects together, it had been 2 years. So I actually technically had only been married 8 years at 10 years. I wonder what it's like now. I haven't done that kind of math.
Well, let's talk about that, because, I remember in my, I quote, you contributed to a blog post recently of mine where you said the business is really about chasing incentives. And so you're on the road an enormous amount. You're out shooting. You're not just shooting here in LA. So what is it like on your family life?
Oh my gosh. It is so complicated, especially when you're young and dumb and running around this business and you're a rock star, and you start the family and you both think you understand what you're getting into. And so, for example, I signed the mortgage on the first place that I bought, literally signed it, went to the airport, got on a plane. 4 days later, I get a call from my wife that she's pregnant with our first child, and I am on the East Coast for 4 months.
Wow.
This is before we were just starting to email. As a matter of fact, that project was one of the first projects where a script was emailed across the country for us to get, and the script file was all scrambled, and I was an early adopter of Final Draft and all those things. And so they were panicking about reformatting the script, and they were sending me around in a car with this disc for all these computer people. I finally asked, what is the problem? They said, it's not formatted properly. And I put it into my computer, and I reformatted the script with Ridley Scott, because I knew what to do with if it gets messed up over an email. And so I was away for 4 months emailing back and forth lists of names of children with my wife to come up with our son's name. And it was so strange to think, I didn't see her grow. I came home and she was 3.5 months pregnant. So I was walking into a place that I had not seen, that she had gotten painted and organized, like literally put this house together, this condo. So you go into these places where that's what happens. And you try to think, okay, well, my family will just come with me to Mexico. Well, that doesn't work. Your kids have got to go to school. And there are guys that traveled with their kids and put them in Waldorf schools. My son had some needs. He had some learning differences, and it wasn't going to be possible. And I was very upset by that, because I just assumed that the Pollard clan would jump on the road and we'd all be migrant film workers together. And that didn't happen. It has happened a couple times where she's come with the kids and stayed with me.
Well, I will say this. Having been here for 30, 40 years, I think when people come out, and you tell me if you've experienced this, the single greatest reason people fail in the industry is because the husband and wife are not on the same page.
Yes.
And when that falls apart, they usually end up leaving. They struggle in the industry. Or the divorce rate is so important that you have to be on that same page. You
have to understand that there's no guarantee that you're going to be successful in this.
Oh yeah.
That's like a huge thing. And to think that my wife and I have been married 29 years, she considers herself a Hollywood widow for a lot of my children growing up. She was a single mother. Yeah. The amount of times, I'll put it into perspective for an entire family. So I was down in Mexico for 4 months on one project years ago. It was the Once Upon a Time in Mexico, Robert Rodriguez.
Yeah.
I came home. I was home literally for 2 weeks. 9/11 happened. I was supposed to travel on 9/11 to Texas to continue working with Robert Rodriguez, this time now on Spy Kids 2, which was the first time. My son had been on sets. My son had pictures and been held by famous people. Had no idea who they were at that age. But when we watched Spy Kids together before I went to Mexico to work with Robert on Once Upon a Time, he was blown away watching these kids do all this stuff, because that was his first kid movie, and they were flying, and they were spies. And I said, I'm going to Mexico to work with the director of this. There's consideration for a second Spy Kids. If things go well for me in Mexico, I could end up on that, and you could come and visit that set. Well, he came to Mexico and visited while I was on the other project, and no idea. Yep. I had to keep him away from the explosions. I couldn't take him on that stuff. But then he came and visited on that. So I left for 4 months, came back for 2 weeks, went to Texas, was there, and my family came to visit me. And only after leaving there did I find out from my wife that on that first job in Mexico, that my son woke up one morning. I was calling him every morning before school, calling him every afternoon after school, and calling him before bed. I was sending video, cutting it and putting it together in emails and sending it home of, here's the explosion, here's what Dad's doing, here's Mexico, here's these things. He turned around and looked at her one morning as he was watching television, eating breakfast, and said, hey, Mom, do you remember that guy? What guy? The one that used to live here? You mean your dad? The guy you just got off the phone talking with? Yeah. Did he die? It didn't make a difference to my son that I was talking to him at that age, at
Interesting.
4 and 5 years old.
Interesting.
He did not know the difference between me on the phone and me in person. And that killed me. If she had told me that while I was in Mexico, I would have walked away from the job. And she knew that. And that's what's scary, is you make decent money, especially once you get into a guild.
Right.
You do well. But the reality is, at what cost? And so back to what you just said, the reality is that you have got to be on the same page with your wife. You have got to feel, if you're faithful and you have some sort of faith in God, that you're called to this. Don't come here to try to change it for God. If you are not called to be in this environment, it will eat you up and spit you out.
Yeah.
I feel eaten up and spit out, and I know I was created to be here where I am today, but it's not easy. It affects every person in your life. Your family members that are not your wife, your where you came from, will think you're a drug addict. You don't call. You get so caught up in your business. You're all of a sudden, months later, I just was doing this thing. And people don't understand those gaps. But we're in this place where what's happening in front of us is so intense. We do so much by 9 a.m. that most people don't even do in a day. And then we do that for 9 months on a TV show or 4 months on a feature film. And you think, oh, that just gives me license because I'm doing this important, cool thing. Well, it's not important, honestly. Movies just go away. TV shows, no one remembers them after they have their experience with them. It's pointless stuff. So for me, being in that environment and being on the same page with my wife and knowing that I am there to be the most consistent, kind, compassionate, honest human being that I can be in that environment, in an environment that's full of allegedly backstabbing. And there are some tough stuff in the business, but I have met some of the most incredible humans on the planet in this business who just love to go into this mess and create together. It's like a group of people that would never be together, come together for this thing. They might be together in some seedy bar somewhere with a bunch of alcoholics, or in prison. It's that kind of a crowd of people that are just
also, this may sound weird, but I've shot in about 70 countries around the world, and film crews everywhere are pretty much the same.
It's bizarre.
You
language barriers or whatever.
You know what a C-stand is. You use the same schedule, the same terminology. You can pick up with a film crew in Africa, in Asia, in Russia, and they know the lingo. They know what you're doing.
And they do it a little differently.
How that works.
It is. And what's really interesting for me is having worked in Morocco, having worked in Paris, having worked in Montreal, and these places where, Mexico especially, there's a cultural thing that happens. And if you go in there as an American and expect the American experience and have the American, expectations, it's a letdown, because places like Mexico were actually churning out more product in the 50s than we ever imagined in Hollywood. And yet there's this tone that, we know what we're doing. I love to go in and learn from the culture and kind of move my management style into what is needed and learn the culture and try to learn as much of the language as you can to get through your days and at least try. And that to me has been a really important part of it because it is so strange, the similarity of personality types that gravitate toward departments, even in other countries. You just go, wow, this is really weird.
So give me some advice for someone breaking into the business. If you could go back and advise yourself back in those early 80s, what would you tell yourself? What advice do you give to people trying to break in? What do they need to know? What do they need to be good at? What do they need to be ready for?
It's a long game. You will not start out doing exactly what you want. So the goal is to always get your foot in the door, which usually, more often than not, is working as a production assistant in one of the departments, whether you're on set with production or in the office with the production office coordinator or in the art department or in, the other departments that will take production assistants. And just do the job that's in front of you and don't sell people your script. Don't sell people what you think you are. Because what you are is a part of a machine, and you're very fortunate to see how the machine works. If you can keep a sight on the passion and have a group of people that you went to school with or from your church that's in your media team, that you can develop your ideas and go and shoot your stuff on the weekends, but do what you're hired to do. Don't sell people on Jesus. Don't sell people on your script until the relationship is built where someone asks you. Set a course to set up and do the best job with what you're handed on the day. Every position that I have gotten in this business, from being the swing gang set dresser, I was then asked within 12 hours to become the on-set dresser. Your personality, your ability to handle people, back to the people skills thing, makes me think you'd be better at this. Then the prop guy said, hey, you'd be a great prop guy. So I went from swing gang to prop guy. And then from prop guy, I had an assistant director come to me and say, hey, man, I think you'd be a better assistant director and a production assistant than you are a prop guy. I'm like, does that mean I suck as a prop guy? What do you say to me? I hadn't, because it still wasn't on my radar. If this man, Scott Robertson, had not said to me, I think you'd be good at this, I want you to try this, I wouldn't have ever done this. This was not my plan. I'm an actor. I want to direct. Now I produce. I acted in the little film that I produced, one scene. I've gotten to do everything that I ever have wanted to do in this business, and none of it made me rich. None of it solved any of my problems. I just found that I was capable. So realize that you're going to be challenged with things if you're joining this business. What you think you're setting out to do and what you're good at could be two totally different things. And you have to be open to being willing when someone else says, hey, I think you'd be good at this, or would you try this for me? Don't be afraid to say yes, even though you don't have a freaking clue what that means. Step up to the plate and see what happens, and then just own your mistakes. Always own your mistakes. Do not be the idiot in this business that blames the other guy. Step up to the plate, own your mistakes, and just strap in for the long haul.
That's good.
Kevin Gage, the actor who was in Heat. I don't know if you remember the movie Heat. So Michael Mann. And Wayne Grove was the guy that caused everything to go bad. He was the most perfect, what do you call that guy? Convict looking guy. I thought he was just that guy. And I ended up working with him again on G.I. Jane, where he did not look like that guy at all. He was then a drill sergeant. He was behind me in a van one day, and he said something in the tone of Wayne Grove, and I went, wait, what? You played Wayne Grove? He goes, yeah. We got to talking, and he encouraged me. I was newly married, first child on the way. He said, dude, I have a feeling that you're going to be in this business for a long time. Entertainment, Hollywood, all this stuff is like getting on a big bus, and you're in the back of the bus for the first 10 years. But you know what happens every year? He goes, I've been in this business now for 30 years. I make my living solely as an actor. I make $100,000 a year. Some years I don't know if I'm going to make the whole health insurance thing. He goes, but I stayed on the bus. And what happens every year, the longer you're on the bus, more people get off, just like we were talking about before. Their family can't handle the cost. They can't handle the cost of living in Los Angeles. Someone gets sick back home, wherever back home is, and they go home and they never come back because it's too comfortable and easy. to just go back to the economy you're used to. So every time someone gets off the bus, if you're still on the bus, you're moving up. And he goes, Korey, I'm in like the first 3 rows right now, and it's pretty crazy. He goes, I see you being that guy. So I just tell people to stay on the bus if it's really what you think you want to do, and it'll become clear whether you're good at it or not. Because if you're having to definitely hustle after 10 years, like literally panicking between jobs, that might not be for you. If you get to the point where you can work with your wife, work with your sibling, you work with your whoever you're with, and say, hey, we're going to take this amount of time off. We're going to suck it up. We're going to figure out what this looks like, and I'm going to stay this course. And I've been very fortunate. It's worked out really well.
I love the comment about the long view, and let's kind of wrap this up with maybe a final question, and that is, how have you navigated the industry being a Christian, being a person of faith? Has that been a challenge? Has it been difficult?
Yeah, because it's one of those things where I am not a circled wagons religious guy. I don't believe belonging to the megachurch and showing up Wednesday and Sunday makes me a Christian. I believe that my life has been transformed by being touched while I was a drug addict, and now I'm still a drug addict alcoholic. I just happen to be in recovery today because God has given me a way of living that is new and different. But what that has really translated to in me, I've never fit in any sort of Christian ministry in the business. We were talking about that at coffee the other day. The number of times I've showed up at these places that are supposed to be for people in the business, but because I don't fit the bill of a producer, a writer, actor, whatever, because I'm production, and I do all these other things. Early on in my career, I didn't have anywhere to fit. So my faith and believing that God had put a desire in my heart, Psalm 37, and he will realize that. This isn't my desire. At this point, I'd rather be a teacher somewhere, honestly. But I've been given a skill set. This is my tent making skill. I want to make other movies with other directors that I really love who have this mindset of believing in Christ. But the reality is, I want to be him on the sets. I don't want to sell him. I don't want to put him in my movies as a prop. I don't want everything that I do to be, is it Christian? Because he didn't come to make churches. He came to make people walk in the culture in a completely different way than the culture. And there's no better place to be kind, compassionate, caring, focused, and a part of people's lives than in the film industry where people feel completely bowled over. So my struggle has been with Christians who ask me, do they know you're a Christian on that set? I said, you know what? I am working every day just to make sure that what I believe is real. I believe it, but I can't belong behind those circle wagons. I feel like I don't get received well when I talk about my faith in the way that I have experienced it over and over for 30 years, and it doesn't matter. So my struggle is in not trying to belong anywhere, but being obedient to the call that's in my heart, in my life, on the day that I'm in. Not my vision, not the ministry I think I should start so it transforms the world for Christ, because I was that guy in the beginning. Young entertainers for Christ. We're going to stamp out the smut in Hollywood, and we're only going to do pure films. And then he put me working on horror films, and then he put me working with Rob Zombie, and I just said yes. You opened a door, and there's a time to discern, for sure. Sure. But there are other times it's like, if not me, then who?
Yeah.
And I had that experience. I'll wrap it up with this story. I was in a men's Bible study at Hollywood Presbyterian at 6 a.m. for the first 3 years of my following Christ and getting sober and working back into this business. Because there was a point where I thought this business was as much a part of my problems as the drugs and alcohol were. And so I got out of it all and went to work at the ministry, got thrown under the bus in the ministry. And all of a sudden God opened the door back up for me to become a guy working in Hollywood and go right to these stronger, more managerial positions, not just trying to find my way, but actually shaping the project and managing them. And so in that process, there was a guy, Marvin Wadlow, who was a part of this group, who at that time, back in the early 90s, he was with Suge Knight. He was producing some of the biggest rap videos in those scary places where they had gun, like what do you call those, metal detectors. And I would look at him and go like, Marvin, how can you do that? You believe this stuff that we're studying in the Bible? He goes, Korey, look, God's given me a skill. He's opened the door for me to be there. And if I can just say something that's different than any of those people, that's what I'm going to do. And then comes a point where he gets hired to produce The Howling 7. Now, the first one was pretty good, scary. But who knew they'd made 7. And they basically made this movie. They went into live entertainment, these 2 producers. We're going to make The Howling 7. You want a piece? Yes. $2 million. They wrote a check to this guy. They took $1.5 million, left $500,000 for the movie to be made. And Marvin said, I would like you to work on this. I'm like, it's a horror film. I'm a Christian now. I'm not sure that's the right thing. He goes, how about you go home and pray and see what God says? I'm like, ooh, interesting concept. And out of the prayer, what I got was, who are you to tell me where I want you? I'm like, well, that's pretty heavy. So I told Marvin, he goes, good, you're going to be a PA. Well, a day before production, the second AD quit because he got a higher paying job. So suddenly I was the second AD. Never been a second AD before. I'd been a production assistant on one project and a prop guy for 4 years and a swing gang set dresser for 2 years at that point.
Wow. Yeah.
And I said, I don't know. If it's outside this box, I don't know it. And he goes, you'll be fine. I said, should we talk to the director? He goes, yeah. So I talked to the director and the first AD, said the same thing. Outside this box, I don't know. They said, you're going to be fine. You pay attention, you ask good questions, you're going to be fine. Going through the job, I'm in this production office. There's a conversation about spirituality. There's a conversation about Jesus. This one woman says, I was raised in a Christian home, and I don't feel like Jesus has any problem with me coming to Los Angeles and going to the feet of my guru for wisdom. And I'm like, ding, 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 all these red flags, and all the Christianese wanted to come out, but not a word came out of my mouth, Phil. I couldn't say anything in the environment. And I felt like a loser. I'm like, you put me here. I don't understand. That night I was leaving the set, which was out in Pioneer Town, Yucca Valley, and we were staying down in town. And the lady who had this Jesus comment needed a ride. And she said, hey, will you give me a ride to the hotel? I'm like, sure. And in my car was playing one of the, remember cassette tapes? Cheesy Maranatha cassette, worship band tape playing, and I didn't realize it was playing. It was low, it was dark, we're driving through the desert, and she starts crying. I hear this, I'm like, oh no. She goes, will you rewind that song? And it was about redemption. No matter how far you've gone, I'm right here for you. Doesn't matter what you've done, come back to me, I'm here. And I played it, and by the time we got to the hotel, she was weeping. And I thought, oh, this is so weird. What do I do? I feel like I'm supposed to pray for her. So we got out of the car, and we're looking across the top of the car at each other. She's on the passenger side, and I'm looking at her. I'm saying, Melanie, I don't want to freak you out, but I feel like I'm supposed to pray for you. But if it's going to freak you out, I'll just pray for you when I go to the hotel room. She goes, no, please. I said, God, thank you for Melanie. Thank you for putting us where we are. I ask that you would bring women into her life that would show her what you have for her in her life. Thank you for allowing us to be here. I love you. And I'm literally crying right now because she walked away and I stood outside that car going, this is crazy. The rocks and the stones will cry out. And ass talked to Paul, and I am on the Howling 7. You have a plan that's beyond my comprehension. I'm just going to show up, and I still judge the content. I still want to be holier than thou. I still want to do these things differently. But if I feel that he's pushing me in a direction, I'm not going to go to some guy that's going to tell me, no, you shouldn't go there. I'm going to follow what the scripture tells me in my heart as I read and I journal and I pray and I meditate on God's impact in his spirit, in my spirit every day. And I don't need to sprinkle, dunk, kneel, or bow to do that. So maybe I'm a heretic.
No. Well, we'll have another episode on that. Well, thanks so much. I mean, it's so great to have an honest look at what it's like working in the film business. So many times we look at, I've interviewed, Ralph Winter, who you've worked with, and other guys, and it's just interesting, different perspectives. But to see somebody in the trenches like you that's working every day, cranking stuff out, it's just an interesting conversation to have. And a lot of people are going to be really just going to have an impact on a lot of people. So thanks again. And maybe we'll do this again sometime.
Well, thanks for your time. Yeah, I'd love to do that. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it. Thanks, Phil.
Thanks so much for tuning into this episode of the Phil Cooke Podcast. Remember my book, Ideas on a Deadline, How to Be Creative When the Clock is Ticking. I'll tell you, being creative under pressure can completely separate you from the pack. You want to be noticed in your career. You want to stand out. You want to make an impact. Learn to be extraordinarily creative and have breakthrough ideas the minute you need them. And the secret is in this book. There's all kind of techniques and ideas and ways for you to bring up those ideas when you need them the most, and you really need to check them out. In the meantime, come see me at my blog at philcooke.com. Remember, Philcooke. I'm Cooke with an E. And until then, I will see you on the next episode.